Let's start with the morning Diddy trial stuff. Let's see what's going on.
Dr. Dawn Hughes took the stand this morning on day 8 of the Diddy trial in an effort by the state to try and explain to the jury some of the conflicting testimony that they may have perceived from Cassie Ventura. Now, Cassie is one of the state's alleged sex trafficking victims, courtesy of defendant Sean Puffy Combs, and her testimony was designed to help the jury better understand why it is that she seems to express so much love for Diddy while purportedly being coerced into behavior against her will. I'm Joe Neerman, aka Good Logic. I'm an attorney down in the courtroom.
Yeah, basically she was in a relationship with Diddy,
as to how this trial is
but it was like a consensual, non-consensual I don't know. It was weird because she was like an escort as well.
Doing a live stream at night where I go into much greater detail as
it's
to
a
what we
wild
saw
fucking
earlier
trial.
that day. Now, Dr. Hughes came up and said that she wanted to address 4 different areas as to how trauma victims will react to that trauma, and specifically addressing why someone who's a victim and a long-term victim of domestic violence would stay in that abusive relationship, as well as how they cope with that abuse, how they end up expressing it and disclosing it, and how it affects their memory. And the objective here, again, was to try and help the jury better understand what's going on. She's in this abusive relationship, according to her testimony, on and off for 11 years and keeps going back. As Dr. Hughes explained, and beneficial from the state's perspective, ended up using language that Cassie herself used during her testimony when she was giving.
So they got a doctor, basically a psychologist, I guess.
Long-term sufferer of domestic violence will tend to act. Now, Dr. Hughes never conducted any interviews of Cassie, never spoke with her. She's what they call a blind expert.
Yeah, blind. Yeah, so basically she
and tries to gather what she sees going on in the news.
Yeah, so blind experts will just gather as much resources as they can, and then look at all the information and sources, and then give a expert opinion onto basically onto what's going on.
Much like any of you may be following what's going on in the news, and tries to get an overall picture. But this is not Cassie's specific psychologist. She's never sat down and met with Cassie at all. She's talking in general as an expert who understands how a typical
just the general
domestic
sense
violence
of
sufferer
how it happens
would react to that trauma. And she said that, and she expressed in
right, they're not trying to diagnose her, right? They're just they're an observer, right? It's observation.
What they saw in the past, different methods that they use to try and cope and deal with that abuse, and the justifications that they use. She talked about minimization, how the victim will often not disclose it with anyone for a myriad of reasons, such as shame or embarrassment, fear of not being believed. And she talked about that, how the abuser tends to act in these relationships, and a lot of it seemed very consistent with testimony that we heard from Cassie. She talked about using financial power in order to try and keep that person feel physically under your control. He talked about how they may threaten and engage in emotional abuse, try and make the person feel lesser than, try and make them strip them
fear,
of their independence,
physical
by making
threats,
them feel that they need this other person, both financially and also to try and reclaim the respect and admiration that they got during the honeymoon phase of the relationship, and that there's a continual effort to try and get back to that honeymoon phase, and a hope that if they can try to find a way to
unfortunately
manage the
won't
situation,
be getting
that they
back
will
to that honeymoon phase
and coming back to the good periods, the good times. But that throughout the time, part of their coping methods is that they act like someone who has PTSD, and they're walking on eggshells. So much of the testimony was very consistent with language that Cassie was using. For example, she talked about how they get stripped of their agency, of their ability to feel independence. And one of the things that we heard Cassie talk about when she was asked whether she would whether she would trade the money to have not lived through these experiences. The language that Cassie used is, "I would give anything back to get back my agency," which, when she said it, I thought was an unusual choice of words. But in the context of the fact that she has received a great deal of therapy to try and cope,
Yeah,
with
she probably got
the
therapeutic help, right? So it's
the impact
you would say
of
that,
her
okay.
extended, or her purportedly extended abuse at the hands of Diddy. You can understand why that's a language that would come back
Yeah,
to
it
her,
would
that
come
she's been
back,
trying to reclaim her agency. The Dr. Hughes went on to explain how they will frequently go back, even go back to the abuse, and that the effort in going back is that they feel that it's not working, that if they try to get away, that they never can get away, that it's an impossible situation to get free of. And that is consistent with Cassie's language, that she said, how do you get out of a situation like this? How do you do that? She talked about how there will frequently be gaps in memory, that when the person is trying to recall it, there may be certain things that will be very vivid, and central parts of the story will be there, but that often they might focus on one particular thing, either because they're trying to become dissociative and they're trying to just zone out on something, and that could be something that's intentionally that they're doing, and they'll just remember what color the drapes were and how they were fluttering in the midst of being abused, because it's their way of leaving their body and dissociating. And when she talked about dissociating, you would think that the jury would likely call back to when Cassie frequently testified how that she would take drugs to try and become dissociative, to try and not actually be in her body while she was going through those freak-offs that she purportedly went through hundreds of times. So the tracking of language between Cassie's testimony and the typical domestic violence victim, that tracking of language seemed to run throughout the testimony, and it didn't seem that she actually even watched the trial. It seemed as if that everything that Cassie had been saying seems almost textbook from what Dr. Hughes has experienced. She's a 30-year board-certified clinical psychologist, and you'd have to think that she made significant strides in the state's effort to try and help the jury better understand why it is that she still seems to be expressing love. As Dr. Hughes explained, she said years after they leave,
I hate to say it, but if you're in that type of, right, these people, it seems like these people grow they grow that unconditional love, right, because of how long their relationship was. And even if they've been abused or, been put down like that, they are still, they, for whatever reason, in their mind, they will still think that in the long term, it's okay. Jesus.
Have a sense of love. And she talked about
rough.
A trauma bond. A trauma bond being that through the course of going through that trauma,
to be fucking,
their efforts to cope with it and to try and recover that honeymoon phase will make them feel in certain ways a stronger sense
if you see
of
the
love
videos of the video of
in a
Diddy
relationship.
doing all that stuff
so
to
all
Cassie,
this is designed to convey to the jury
I don't know how she can be like, oh, I still love him,
Cassie, which may have sounded conflicting and confusing to many of us as to why she's doing what she's doing. Why would she keep going back? And
domestic violence
and
about
her credibility.
trauma bonding,
the state was
abuse,
trying to lay
right?
that to rest by showing how, from everything Dr. Hughes was testifying, that seems consistent with a classic long-term sufferer of domestic violence.
Yeah.
Now, we had just begun cross-examination when we broke for lunch.
And
I certainly
people who have been in people who have been in that sort of instance, like Cassie, you can tell by just their speech and just how they view the world, how they perceive the world. Sometimes in their statements, it's just like Jesus.
I feel you
feel kind of bad for those people because
very methodically
they have rewired their brains
as far as how she
to think a certain way,
and what steps she takes in order to make her assessments And I certainly will plan on reporting back to you on that at the close of trial today. And again, giving you
Oh,
a much more detailed
we got the
breakdown
afternoon one
this
as well.
evening. I hope you'll join me for that. Please make sure you click like, share, subscribe. I'm Good Logic. Till next time, Godspeed.
All right. He's been yeah, Good Logic, he's a lawyer that out of attorney out of New York. So he's been able to see the trial. All right, let's see the afternoon one. Go like and follow if you like them. All right, here's the next one.
The Diddy trial is officially fire. What up, everybody? It's Joe Neerman, aka Good Logic, your lawyer inside the Diddy courtroom. If that's your sort of thing and you want to get perspectives from a New York litigator who's practiced in this very courtroom, I urge you to please make sure you like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell, because this Diddy trial is taking off this afternoon, and oh my God, was it electric. Now, in case you don't know the background here, the state's case is that Diddy has sexually trafficked 2 women. One of them is Cassie Ventura, who spent 4 days last week talking about the years of abuse where she had to participate in freak-offs, which were sexual encounters with third parties. When you heard her testimony, she seemed very conflicted. She still expresses levels of love, at the very least, for the time she spent with him, and respect, and that he helped sculpt who she is today, and at the same time was describing patterns of abuse which were very unsettling for those of us who had to sit through listening to all the beatings that she took, punching her, kicking her, blackmailing her, threatening her that he was going to release videos if she didn't do what he wanted to do. The state has presented a case that she's been under his financial thumb, that he signed her to a label of doing 10 albums and made her work all the time to do songs that he would never ever release, and designed to show that she was completely under his thumb and his control. But if you listen to her testimony,
basically being used as a work slave, I guess is what they're trying to get at.
Affliction that you certainly could tell in there, because she's continually expressing things to him that show love, and even that she, at certain times,
basically Diddy was trying to be a pimp.
She said she had to say to him,
and
keep testimony. In order to shore that up this morning,
keep his bitch on a chain. Sorry, goddamn it.
Psychologist, board certified, who came out there and tried to explain what it's like for someone who suffered years of domestic abuse. She talked about how they form a trauma bond, and how in certain ways they love the person in more than you have in a healthy relationship, and that they're continually walking on eggshells. She covered 4 primary areas. 1, why they stay with them and go back to them. 2, she was talking about their coping methodology. 3, she talked about their disclosures and how they make those disclosures. And 4, she talked about their memory and how it could be somewhat, and why it's going to be hazy, and certain things are really clear and other things are not, and that's consistent with the way it should be if you suffered from years of trauma. Well, that was potentially disastrous for Diddy, who's hoping to present to the jury and that they'll find that she was sincerely doing it out of love, and not that she was just some sort of trauma victim testifying. So this afternoon, we got real fire from the defense counsel. Not in an angry, aggressive way at all. He actually came out there being very soft-spoken, talking to her about how she clinically tries looking at things and assessing it, but it's a blind trial. It's a blind assessment, which is what she testified on direct. She never met with Cassie. She's just talking in general theory how things work with domestic violence survivors.
Honestly, I think blind reads are better, because then you're detaching yourself from getting like in a way a bias from getting to know the person, right? And if you do I feel like if you do the blind read without knowing the person, you separate yourself, right, in that sense, right? And you're more of an observer than an actual person who knows the person, right?
And then, but then he goes, you talked about coping. You talked about different methods of coping. There's a formal method you mentioned.
I mean, there's
you
different
talked to
ways
police or
you can
healthcare
do
workers,
an
that's
an
formal.
assessment
And then you
of
talked about
someone's
informal coping, where
if
you
someone's
said that's
been
where they
going
go when
through
they
that kind
talk
of stuff.
to
It
friends
just
and
depends
family.
on
So
what
where would you
kind of practice and
classify
what
someone who
if
goes
you
straight
paid
to
for
a
it and
civil
whatnot.
attorney?
Because at the end of the day, it is a service to do
The
that.
witness is like, and if someone goes to the civil attorneys to help them get money, right? So is that formal? Is that informal when they talk to a civil attorney? Because that was what Cass testified. One of the first people she disclosed her story to was her civil attorney.
Civil attorney.
Link said, what about, we talked about memory recollection. What if they go to the police and things are very hazy? Yeah, that could be sometimes. Are you familiar with the term prevarication? You mean lying? Yes, I mean lying. Is that neurobiological when they're engaging in prevarication? No, not always. Oh, okay. And
but they do
lie.
lie.
You about when we have these
See, yeah, and that's right, and that's the issue. When these people go through that shit, it's like you don't know if they're telling the truth or not because they've been through so much shit, right? Because they always flip-flop on their judgment. Right? They flip-flop on what they actually want, right? This is why I say humans are fickle beings, right? And they're always wishy-washy.
The things are hazy.
Because this shit happens, right? This happens on the daily.
Hazy. What do you think about that? And the entire room I was in, the jury viewing room, was just like, oh man, oh. And then he kept going in harder. He started talking about how she always testifies. She's testified in 65 different trials. This forensic psychologist, she's forensic and clinical, 65 trials, and she's like, you're always sitting there on behalf of domestic violence, domestic abuse sufferers, and that you've given seminars, and the idea being that she's always taking the side of someone who is purportedly claiming that they've been a victim of domestic violence. And then he started going in about how she's been working for the government. She presented this morning as if, well, she's just, some independent forensic person.
I mean, that is an angle to attack.
And
sure.
while she admitted she was getting compensated by the government, he got out of her that she was helping the government with their briefs. That she's helping and consult with them as to how they should talk to, how they should.
Oh,
how they should
so she was
she
was like a consultant now.
And when she talked about the seminar, and he's laying out there how you're helping train people how they should testify as expert witnesses in other domestic violence situations. And now you're working for the government, and you're helping.
Oh,
them
is that
with
what
their
she
briefs.
actually does?
And the whole room every time was like, oh my God.
Oh.
Wow. Like, he was really hitting on her really hard. But on redirect, when Reen Comey was handling redirect, she wasn't pulling punches either. She said, when we sent you briefs to review, the facts of the case were kept out of it, because this was an important element. That she's not supposed to know the facts of this case. She's talking just general policy, general rule.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, when we sent you those briefs, they were redacted, weren't they? Yeah. And why were they redacted? So I wouldn't know the facts of this case.
Okay, so there it is. So she had so all the information that they gave her was redacted. Right? All they knew was probably the name of whoever, right? All they knew was probably the name that she had to, right, do a research on, and she did her research on. They basically redacted all the personal information.
Okay, and also, do you only work for the government when you testify? No, many times for the defense. In fact, one time you testified on behalf of one of the defense attorneys who was sitting in this room. And she said, yeah, that's right. Anyway, that's what I have for you right now. I'm going to break it down for you in great detail tonight, probably around 9 o'clock.
Well, yeah.
Please make sure you tune into
I mean, yeah.
I'll see you at that time. Till then,
at the end of the day, yeah, court trials are just, right, arguments against arguments. And you just have to hope the jury latches on and, right, keeps that information in their head so that they can make a ruling. So, yeah, we will see how this
Godspeed.
pans
Fire,
out.
fire, fire.
I think this is going to be going on for like a month and a half, 2 months, something. It's going to be a long trial, especially with all the people they're calling up. All right, there we have it. Good logic. If you want to take a look at his channel. Uh. Everybody's just. I thought people were gonna ask a question, so that's why I was gonna. Dr. Hughes, the clinical psychologist with the Amber Heard. Oh yeah, so Dr. Don Hughes. Yeah, this was the Amber Heard psychologist that. Yeah, that was. Yeah, that was on the Amber Heard team. Yeah, she's the. Yeah, that person. Or she was called in to do the same thing basically. As the daughter of attorney and former paralegal, I'd go to the lawyer if up against an abusive, powerful, and extremely wealthy man like Sean Diddy Combs. That to me is smart. Yeah, yeah, you're not wrong. Yeah, especially his especially Diddy. Yeah, especially his status. That is true. All right. All right. Thank you. Good logic. There you have it.